In this video, I'm going to talk about the urinary system, which is a key component in our body's overall excretory systems. There are several systems that remove things from the body. That's what excretory means. We already talked about the integumentary system, and of course, sodium is excreted when you sweat, so that's going to remove some sodium, because where sodium goes, water goes, and the whole purpose of sweat is to get water on the surface of your skin to allow cooling by evaporation. Your respiratory system excretes carbon dioxide every time you breathe out, along with a number of other molecules, but carbon dioxide is the key one, the waste product you need to get rid of. Your digestive system, of course, excretes indigestible food wastes, so it's a solid waste removal. And the urinary system excretes excess water and the substances dissolved in water. So it is a solution waste removal system. The urinary system is a key player in maintaining the homeostasis of body fluids because it is involved in keeping our pH levels within a very small range, controlling ions such as sodium and potassium or phosphate, and keeping the overall fluid balance or the amount of water that's present in body tissues. Along with keeping these various components of homeostasis in balance, your urinary system also removes toxic waste that are produced by normal metabolism. The key ones are the ones that come from metabolizing protein, and those include urea, uric acid, and creatinine. So those are all coming from protein metabolism. Along with that, the kidneys are involved in regulating red blood cell production through the production of the hormone erythropoietin. The kidneys also monitor blood pressure and works with the parathyroid hormone to control calcium ion absorption in the body. Your kidneys, a key component of the urinary system, are an essential organ. You need to have one to survive, but you can live with only one. So your urinary system is comprised of the kidneys, which deposit urine into the ureters, which then gets collected in the bladder, which is basically a storage organ, and then the urine exits the body through the urethra. So there's only a few parts to the urinary system. Within the kidney, the nephron is the functional unit. It is the place where all the work happens, and it's involved in three big processes, which I'm going to spend a little more time on: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. So you see from this diagram, our kidneys are fairly high in the body. Most people don't realize that they're sitting up there under your ribs. That's for protection because, as I said, they are essential. Without your kidneys, you cannot maintain fluid homeostasis, and you'll only live maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks if your kidneys completely shut down at the most. You will also notice that the aorta and the inferior vena cava run right by the kidneys, and there's a direct line. The renal artery comes off the descending aorta to the kidneys, and then there's a direct line into the inferior vena cava, the renal vein, also from the kidneys. And the fact that there's just these two big blood vessels is also why kidney transplants were the first kidneys were the first organs to be transplanted, because it was really just two big blood vessels to hook up, and then the organ would be functional. So it was a very easy organ to transplant into the body. So let's talk a little bit about the nephrons. As I said, these are the functional unit. This is where things happen. The first thing that happens in the nephron is blood is filtered, and that basically means a bunch of the substances from blood move out of the bloodstream into the nephron itself. And so the capillaries in the nephron, as you can see here, have holes in them. They're fenestrated. And so the plasma and the various substances that are dissolved in the plasma can easily move out of those capillaries. And they are collected in this capsule around the outside of the nephron, as sort of a collecting sac. And so this is going to fill up with filtrate coming out of the bloodstream. So that's the first step. Then as this filtrate moves through this tube of the nephron, I'll show you a picture of it in the next slide, various nutrients and water are reabsorbed. So a lot gets thrown out in the beginning and then things are taken back in. Other molecules are added. Any waste products are dumped into the urine. And then, of course, the sensors are monitoring blood pH and the volume of the blood pressure, red blood cell count, all that stuff. Various sensory cells are keeping track of that and making adjustments as the filtrate moves through the nephron. The kidneys filter about 150 liters of plasma a day. Now, you only have about 3 liters of plasma in the body. So you can see it is going through your kidneys about 50 times a day. But only a tiny percentage, approximately 2 liters, is actually excreted as urine. So all this plasma gets dumped out into the nephron, and most of it is going to be reabsorbed back in because the amount you excrete is very, very small compared to the amount that is filtered out. Here are some other diagrams showing you how the kidney is set up. Basically, the kidney is a kidney bean-shaped organ. That's where the name comes from. And it's a handful. I mean, you could put it in your hand. It's a pretty good sized one. Your nephrons are going to be laying here all around the outside. The kidney itself, the outside, is divided into 2 layers. The cortex is closer to the outside, and the medulla is more towards the center. As urine is made in the nephrons, it will be dropped into collecting ducts that are going to go then deposit the urine into this central area, which is known as the renal pelvis. And then the renal pelvis is going to empty into the ureter on its way to the bladder. As I mentioned earlier, kidneys have a direct line to the descending aorta and the inferior vena cava, and about 20% of your total blood volume is found in the kidneys at any one moment. This plasticized kidney gives you a sense of how many blood vessels are in there, because it really is, this filtration of the blood is a very, very important job to get rid of those metabolic waste, to maintain fluid balances, all of those very, very essential roles that your kidney does for you. So as I already mentioned, your blood is filtered in this capsule. It's called the glomerulus. And that is the beginning part of the nephron. So we have a arteriole coming into the glomerulus. It breaks down into many, many capillaries. The filtrate moves out, or the plasma essentially. Now it changes names again as it changes location. So the fluid part moves out of the bloodstream into the capsule and becomes then part of this tube that is the nephron. The capillaries will recombine into another arteriole, and that arteriole, as it leaves the glomerulus, actually then turns back into capillaries that wind their way all the way around the tube of the nephron. And so we have these peritubular capillaries that are surrounding the nephrons. And there's at least 1 million nephrons in each kidney. They're very, very small, but very, very important. There are different sections of the nephron. We have the proximal convoluted tubule, so it is a very squiggly part. That's what the convoluted means. Proximal, it's close to the glomerulus. So the proximal convoluted tubule, the filtrate, after it goes through the PCT, it will go down into this long loop called the loop of Henle, and this one basically sits in the medullary section of the kidney. And then back through another convoluted tubule, the distal convoluted tubule, the farther away convoluted tubule, that then will eventually drop into the collecting duct, which collects the urine, taking it down to the renal pelvis. The filtration rate, the speed at which filtrate comes out of the capillaries in the glomerulus, is about 120 milliliters per minute. But this is regulated by your nervous system. When you are in a high sympathetic nervous system time, if you're in a fight or flight situation, your kidneys will actually slow down the filtration rate because you need to have the attention of your body directed someplace other than making urine. And of course, your endocrine system, the various hormones, the antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone, some of the other hormones that we talked about previously are also involved in controlling the exact filtration rate. But the average is about 120 milliliters per minute. And then the entire length of this tube that makes up the nephron, we have various materials being reabsorbed and secreted. So until we get starting at the glomerulus, going all the way through to the collecting duct, things can be changing in the urine as our body needs things to change. So I'm going to start by talking about reabsorption. So tubular reabsorption is when substances move from the renal tubules into the interstitial fluid and then into those peritubular capillaries. So reabsorption allows the body to keep certain substances. Remember, everything kind of gets dumped out when blood is filtered, and then the body takes back in what it wants to keep, and taking back in is the process we call reabsorption. So, for example, all of these substances down here can be found in the filtrate as it leaves the glomerulus, but those are reabsorbed. We take back in glucose. We take back in lots of water. Some urea does move back in. We want to keep a hold of proteins and creatine, various amino acids, lactic acid, citric acids, other things that are dissolved, and then some of your minerals, phosphate, sulfate, calcium, potassium, and sodium. And so these are things moving back into the body from the nephron tubule into the peritubular capillaries. Secretion goes the other way. In secretion, substances move from the peritubular capillary, so from the plasma in the blood, through the interstitial space between cells into the renal tubules. Secretion then allows your body to further remove certain substances. It didn't get them all out. Perhaps when the filtrate happened, we want to get rid of some more, a higher concentration of a particular substance, and so that allows it to happen through secretion. Typically, active transport mechanisms are what are doing the secretion, and so we have many mitochondria present in the tubular cells to provide the ATP that you need for this active transport. So this diagram's giving you just sort of a picture of that, of some of the things. Your filtrate is going to contain all of these various substances. They are reabsorbed in places where you see the pink arrows. So that's going from the nephron tubule into the capillaries. We don't see the capillaries on this diagram. And secretion, it's coming from the capillaries and being dropped into the tubule to be removed through the urine. So you can see that, various things moving out. Nutrients we want to save. We don't want them to go out in the urine. Certainly sodium is a very important ion used all over the body. Bicarbonate, that's involved in balancing pH. Water, of course, I already mentioned, we filter so much water out in the kidneys, and we need to get most of that back. Secreted substances that may occur in this first section. This is our proximal convoluted tubule, which is actually much, much longer than this. It's about 6 times longer than the rest of the nephron, so this diagram is not very accurate. But we get, drugs and poisons can get secreted into the urine, get them out of your body. If the pH level is too low, we might add have some hydrogen added to increase pH, to decrease the acidity. The loop of Henle is mainly about water. So water is reabsorbed primarily because sodium is being moved in and out. So where sodium goes, water follows. So the loop of Henle is very much involved in maintaining sodium levels at the right amount so that water will move with the sodium. And then in our distal tubule, we see again some of the familiar same substances we saw on the proximal tubule, along with some minerals. But then even in your collecting duct, we can get a little bit of sodium moving again, which will change water, and then perhaps maybe moving some more urea. So just to give you a comparison between what's found in the blood of certain substances of plasma, in the filtrate after it goes through the glomerulus, and then in the urine in the end product. If we look at something like sulfate or phosphate, these are waste products from metabolism, and so they are going to be found primarily in the urine because we want to get them out of the body. They're not going to be at very high concentrations in blood or in the filtrate, but we want to, use secretion and hanging onto it once it gets into the filtrate to make sure that those substances are removed. But something like glucose, which we don't want to lose because glucose, of course, is the energy source for making ATP in cellular respiration. Values are very high in plasma and in filtrate, but by the time you get to the urine, you don't have any left. You shouldn't have any left because the body wants to hang on to that. And so you can see great differences in concentration in these 3 fluid compartments, depending upon whether this is a substance the body is trying to remove or a substance the body is trying to keep. The nephrons continually produce urine. You are always making urine, and it trickles down the collecting duct system to this renal pelvis. The calyx is the center, kind of the end of the collecting ducts. Then from the renal pelvis, it the urine will move into ureters, which connects to the bladder, and the ureters will squeeze the urine down by peristalsis, that same muscular contraction that moves food down your esophagus. The same thing is happening to move urine to your bladder. So even if you were standing on your head, urine would still be being squeezed down your ureters to your bladder. The bladder collects the urine until various stretch receptors tell your brain that it is full, and then you can send that urine out of the bladder. It leaves the bladder through the urethra, so that's the duct that connects to the outside. There's a great difference in size between female urethras and male urethras. The female urethra is less than 2 inches. The male length is usually 8 to 9 inches long. And so that is why women typically have more problems with urinary tract infections, because the distance from the very hazardous outside environment and the bladder is much shorter. There is a sphincter muscle that is on the end of the bladder that you can voluntarily control after you've been through potty training. And so when you release the external sphincter, then that is when the urine will leave the bladder. Here's a little diagram just showing the various process. So your bladder, is filling. You have an internal sphincter that has contracted. Your pelvic floor muscles are what are holding the external sphincter closed. You have the muscle around the bladder is relaxing, allowing your bladder to fill. When it is about half full, that's when you usually notice that your bladder is filling, but it's not an urgency. You just sort of notice, yes, I'm going to have to find a bathroom at some point. Normally, you want to go to the bathroom when it's about 3/4 full, though you can let it get fuller, but that's usually where we're getting a sense of, I really need to get to the bathroom soon. And when you go to release the urine, when you go to pete or micturate, you will have the muscle inside the bladder will be able to contract. You relax the muscle in the pelvic floor, and the urine will leave the body. So the actual composition of urine will change as it maintains homeostasis. Remember, this is what your urinary system does, keeps everything in balance so far as fluid balance of your body and pH. But basically, urine is about 95% water, and then you have the mix of waste products and electrolytes and some toxic substances and drugs. The volume of urine will vary with how much fluid you are taking in and what sort of environmental factors, such as the air temperature around you, how that will affect your body's fluid balance. I think you're aware that you want to have yellow urine and light yellow urine, so you want to kind of keep it on a pale yellow side. This tells you that you are well hydrated. As it becomes a darker yellow, you are headed towards dehydration, and then certain drugs, certain vitamin supplements, or if you have something like hepatitis, which I have experienced in my life, you can have some very, very dark colored urine. It's for hepatitis, it's because bilirubin is not being broken down, and that's what's coloring the urine. So you want to keep an eye on, what color your urine is. Are you drinking enough? Is it staying a pale yellow color? There are certain things you don't want to find in the urine. If blood is present, it indicates some kind of infection, either a bladder or kidney infection, perhaps a kidney stone that has damaged the lining of the ureter or the renal pelvis, and then, of course, possibly, cancer. Glucose in the urine is a clear sign of diabetes mellitus. The amount of sugar, when somebody is not able to move sugar into their cells because of issues with insulin production or insulin reception in cells, the process of moving glucose from urine into the interstitial space, into the peritubial capillaries, requires active transport. And so there is never enough carrier molecules to move something else when the glucose level is so extremely high. We just can't move enough of it out of the urine, so it will show up in the urine. Protein is also something we typically do not see in the urine and indicates that things are going wrong with the kidney process itself, that there's some type of kidney disease present, that the reabsorption process is not working well. Ketones are a byproduct of fat metabolism, where fat is being burned for making ATP. And so this can be an indication, again, of diabetes or carbohydrate metabolism issues, or just not getting enough food at all. And then I already mentioned bilirubin, which can happen because of hepatitis, and that will color the urine a very dark brown color. Common disorders of the urinary system I want to mention. I already talked about urinary tract infections, so infections of the bladder, it's possibly going all the way to the kidney. This is called a UTI or cystitis and is typically treated with antibiotics. Women are at higher risk for that because of the very short distance it is between the outside and the bladder with their very short urethras. Kidney stones are more common in men, and a kidney stone is a solid crystal of various substances that are naturally part of urine, things like calcium oxalate or calcium phosphate or uric acid. And these are not smooth, round little stones. They are little pointy pieces of crystal that can damage tissues on the way down, can be very, very painful. There is aside from just trying to wait for them to pass and enduring the pain, it is possible to try to break up larger kidney stones with ultrasound. And then finally, stress incontinence or overactive bladder is something that women are more susceptible to. Often just the stresses of pregnancy cause sort of permanent damage that can result in later years having leakage with sneezing or coughing, or a overactive bladder seems to be the body has forgotten how to hold it. And so when this urge to urinate comes, even when the bladder is not full, people have a very hard time not peeing and not leaking. These are things that can be treated. Overactive bladder can be treated by something called bladder training, where stress incontinence is usually a sort of a strengthening program that's recommended, trying to strengthen muscles as much as possible. But it is a common thing. About 50% of women are going to be suffering from this. And again, pregnancy has a big impact on that because pregnancy is pretty rough on the body. So check for understanding. Can you explain why the kidneys are an essential organ? And if you don't have one, you're not going to live very long. Can you talk about the process of urine formation? How does that get put together? Can you explain the difference between filtration, reabsorption, and secretion? What do those words mean? And can you describe some of the factors that are going to influence how much urine you produce, what your urine volume is? If not, go back and listen again so that you're ready for the quiz.